Hey guys, how are you today? It's me, Mrs. Snook. So we're going to talk today about kind of that in-between period. What happens after Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated, June 28th, 1914, and how it leads to World War One. So we're going to talk today about kind of the choices that each country makes and how alliances get more countries involved in the war. We're going to start talking about the first battles and battle strategies in terms of the use of propaganda and kind of lay things out. And then as we go on this week, we're going to start, kind of making lists of key leaders and key vocab words and key battles. We'll be talking about how trench warfare develops, how it impacts the war, how new technology is being used, as we kind of look at the war as it develops in Europe this week. And then next week we'll be looking at, how the United States chooses to enter World War One. We're going to continue working on different skills this week, like how to analyze primary source, how to analyze a political cartoon, how to use maps in our lessons in terms of the importance of geography. So make sure you attend the Google Meet so you can kind of help understand what's going on more and really get your participation grade. So here we go. Let's talk about things. So last week we talked about the four main causes that led to World War One. So you had militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. That word is a mnemonic device, and it really kind of lays out each of those important causes that leads us to World War One. And then we see the spark that really sets off the war as the assassination of the Archduke. And although it was sad that he was murdered, one man's death is not enough to lead to war, which means that going to war was an active choice. And this is where the alliance system really comes in. Remember, we talked last week about how the alliances were originally created in the 1880s. And Germany first created the Triple Alliance under the leadership of a man by the name of Otto von Bismarck, who at the time was the Iron Chancellor, kind of like the Prime Minister, the President of Germany. And he had helped unify Germany into one strong nation. Well, Germany, as it went to war against France, it beat France, it won, and it got from them the land Alsace-Lorraine, which was full of coal and natural resources. And so the Germans were afraid that the French would attack them in the future. To try to keep the Germans safe, they made this alliance system so that Italy and Austria-Hungary would have their back. And so the French would never take on the Germans again, since it would be 3 against 1. And so this alliance system was meant to stop wars. But ultimately, it's going to backfire. It's going to lead to more countries entering World War I. Because when Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated, the Austro-Hungarians are angry. Emperor Francis Joseph will be distraught over his nephew's death, not because he cares for him so greatly, but because his power is being challenged. And he will look to his ally, Kaiser William II, the King of Germany, to give him money, weapons, support, whatever it needs to really and truly, keep the good, Austro-Hungarian Empire together. And so this alliance system will drag more nations into the war. Now, in the years preceding World War I, we saw another alliance system be created. And this was the Triple Entente. An entente, which is a French word, is more of a loose, informal kind of relationship and alliance. It's not as strong or as well bonded. But originally you had the Entente Cordiale between France and Russia, and later it becomes France, Great Britain, and Russia with this Triple Entente. And yet again, it's still the mentality that we're going to back each other and support each other and, be each other's confidant and guide. And part of the reason Great Britain really didn't want to get involved in affairs on the continent and wanted to have peace and stability and stay out of, some of the wars that were cropping up in the Balkan region. But it eventually joins the Triple Entente as it sees the power of Germany growing, and Germany and Britain are in this arms race as they're both creating more, naval battleships. Now, as the war begins, we're going to have two sides. The quote-unquote bad guys are the Central Powers, and the two main powers, of course, are Germany and Austria-Hungary. Now, if you notice, I didn't include Italy. And the reason I didn't include Italy is because Italy does not honor the Triple Alliance. It is a Central Power, maybe for a day, not even. Most people would not identify it as a Central Power. It claims it will be neutral. It will not honor its alliance. And then in 1915, within the first few months of the war, it does choose to enter the war, but it switches sides to the Allied powers after they are promised land, money, power, and they think the Allies might win. Now, the quote-unquote good guys are the Allied powers. And there's many countries that are on both sides here, but the main ones are France and Russia, who are fighting for Serbia. I left Great Britain off that list, but that should be on that list as well. France, Russia, Great Britain comes into the war kind of a few weeks later, and they are both fighting to help the Serbians to keep them safe from the clutches of Austria-Hungary and Germany. And you would, of course, also be able to add to this list Italy, as I mentioned, and the United States, since we entered the war later in 1917. So if we really lay things out when it comes to this war, step by step, the Edpuzzle did this as well. And if your Edpuzzle went terrible and you only got 5 or 6, contact me and I can let you retake it. But, if you're sad because you missed 1 or 2, it's not the end of the world. I realize it might not be what you want grade-wise, but it's only 1 or 2 points. And when I enter grades more this week, it'll improve. But in the Edpuzzle, it really laid things out how these were active choices that these nations made that led them to go to war. So Austria-Hungary, once Emperor Francis Joseph realizes that his nephew, the Archduke, has been assassinated, he is very angry, and he wants to seek revenge on the people of Bosnia and Serbia and stop them from rebelling and creating one united nation for Slavs. He sends a telegram to his best buddy, Kaiser William II, who is the king of Germany. And he says, will you honor the Triple Alliance? Will you give me the money, the guns, the food, the supplies, whatever we need to put down this rebellion? And Germany responds by sending a blank check. And you can see the image at the bottom. This is a blank check, where it says paid to the order of Austria-Hungary from Germany, and the dollar amount is hence blank. But this is really just a metaphor. It's not just that they sent them money. It's more so about giving food and supplies and whatever a country needs to really help them fight. And so at this point, now that Austria-Hungary knows that it can put down the rebellion, because it was clearly worried about its own strength and whether other countries would enter this conflict, it gives Serbia an ultimatum, a final set of demands, saying, do this or this will happen. I'm sure you don't realize it, but ultimatum is a concept you're probably familiar with. If your parents, whoever you live with, if they've ever said to you, clean your room, or you're grounded, get your grade up in U.S. history, or I'll take your phone away. That's an ultimatum. It is a final request. And in the case of Austria-Hungary said to Serbia, give us the leaders of the Black Hand. We believe it's Gavrilo Princip, who has killed the Archduke and his wife. Where is he located? Meet our request, except that you will have no more free speech or free press, and you will be under lockdown, basically what we call martial law, and otherwise expect violence. Now, while Serbia is contemplating this ultimatum, Russia begins to mobilize, which means prepare for war. Tsar Nicholas II is eager to fight, and part of the reason for this is because he supports a concept here called Pan-Slavism. Make sure you write that one down. That one you'll see on your quiz test, and it's not a bold word in this chapter vocab. But he thinks that all Slavic people should support one another, and that in terms of nationalism, they should be allowed to unite into one Slavic nation. Really, he just hates Germany and Austria-Hungary and wants to see them fail and lose territory. And so he supports this mentality that they should all be together. It is a flimsy excuse to go to war. When you think about ethnic backgrounds, you might be Dutch or Brazilian or African American or Mexican American. You might be French. But just because you have that ethnic bloodline does not mean that you're willing to perhaps go fight for France just because you have French blood in you. It's a very flimsy excuse. It'd be no different than if he had said to the people, let's go fight because we like hot dogs and they like hot dogs. That doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. Not everyone in the country even likes hot dogs. Hot dogs are kind of gross. There's no real basis for that statement. And so people are not excited to fight for Russia at all. It's a country that has very little technology. It does not have enough weapons, yet the country starts to mobilize. So many countries are going to rely on volunteers at first. They're interested in perhaps setting up a draft, realizing that they have the manpower. And they're also going to be changing the way their factories are set up in St. Petersburg and Moscow. And no longer will they be producing, just women's high heels, let's say. Now they're going to be producing, guns and such. So the government very quickly starts to try to take control of the economy. Now, at this point, officially Serbia is going to reject the ultimatum, and Austria-Hungary will declare war on Serbia. So Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Serbia declares war on Austria-Hungary. Germany, being Austria-Hungary's ally, declares war on Serbia. Serbia, in turn, declares war on Germany. Now, Germany also realizes that Russia will be backing Serbia because it is mobilized and spoken openly about Pan-Slavism. So Germany declares war on Russia, Russia declares war on Germany. Germany then realizes, because of the Triple Entente, that France will be supporting Russia in this war. And so Germany declares war on Russia, France declares war on Germany. It's a domino effect. So quite simply, by setting off one domino, they're all starting to fall down. And you see this list on the side here of all these allied powers and central powers. You don't really need to worry a ton about them. Honestly, they're all important to know, but like for the allied powers, you really need to know the first three, 1, 2, and 3, that they're fighting for Serbia, number 5, and that Italy and the US are involved 7 and 8. So I guess that is most of the list. And then for the central powers, it's really just Germany, Austria, Hungary, the Ottoman Empire. So I guess technically most of the list. But if you know them, great. And if you don't, that's okay too. I think you'll start to become more familiar with them over time. And our goal will be to also to understand who their leaders are, what the major battles are, and what the different vocab is this chapter as we go through. So I'll probably have to type up a separate document for that here coming up. So moving on. That's the lovely bell. I don't know why they still have bells at this point in the day, because it's 2 to 3:30 and there's no students, but they do. So as the war actually begins, propaganda is going to play a huge role. And propaganda is when the government is trying to convince you to do something, and they're trying to get you to support a new idea. The government uses propaganda all the time. In this modern day, it's ads about wearing a seatbelt, not texting and driving, not drinking and driving, not smoking, things like that. They're different advertisement campaigns which are meant to promote an issue. As World War I is beginning, the government comes out with tons of propaganda because they want people to support the war. And what they're going to openly tell people are things like, go to war. It's only going to last 6 weeks. And they would have all sorts of advertisements for men about how you're a coward if you don't go. And how if you go, it's only going to be 6 weeks. You're not going to get injured. You're going to come back in the best shape of your life. We'll give you a signing bonus if you sign up to go. Volunteer. People are going to think you're a hero. You might even come back with a medal. People are going to love you for it. You're going to get all the ladies. And it sounds sexist and biased, and it is. But many people bought into it and kind of looked at going to war as a great thing, as an adventure. That they'd be home in a few weeks, it'd be life-changing, it'd be awesome. And not only do the propaganda pokers focus on the positive parts of going to war, they also really demonize the enemy. Look at that poster I have on the left, where it says, destroy this mad brute, enlist. Yeah, it's basically taken the Germans and turned the Huns into, a monster. So really and truly, they're doing everything possible to try to make the enemy literally look like a monster, to get you to want to fight in this war. Now, propaganda posters were not just about getting men to enlist, to fight, because early on it was about volunteers. In time it'll be, conscription or a draft. But it was also about trying to get people to donate money to a cause, like buy war bonds. So they would say things like, here, give us $50 now, and in 5 years, we're going to give you $500. And you might say, why would you give the government money? You're basically giving the government a loan. And in 5 years' time, in 20 years' time, they repay you back, $500. They're, making money. So, sorry guys, some background noise. The heat's not working here in the school, and so I'm in a different room. I'm in the cafeteria, so it's kind of loud, just so we can get some heat. So when it comes to, I'll hit pause again. Anyway guys, sorry about that. Yeah, it's freezing in some of the rooms here, so I'm just kind of trying to find heat. So anyway, war bonds, you give them $50 like to the U.S. government. In 20 years, they give you $500, and the thought process here was, you're basically loaning money to the U.S. government so they can use it to buy guns, to buy supplies, to buy food, whatever the government needs to fight this war. But those are all different types of propaganda, as well as like trying to get people to be nurses, you name it. And we'll actually look at some more examples later this week. So here's our actual last slide for today. As the war actually and truly, sorry about that, as the war really and truly begins, Germany desperately does not want to fight what they call a two-front war. And the German General von Schlieffen said, you don't want to fight a two-front war. You don't want to have to take some of your troops and send them west to fight in France while some of the troops are going east to fight, in Russia. You don't want to have that happen. It's going to be extremely difficult. History shows us when Napoleon, the French leader, early 1800s, tried to take over the world, it was pretty much impossible to take over Russia. It's the largest country. It's extremely cold. You need a huge army. And so since Germany is now fighting a war with two enemies on two different sides of them, they don't want to basically have to divide their men. So his thought process was, von Schlieffen said, let's declare war on France very quickly. Let's mobilize even quicker. Let's surprise them. Let's go on with this very fast attack. We'll win, and then we can focus our efforts on Russia. But it's going to be a huge failure. And it's going to be this failure that leads to fighting a two-front war, where in fact their nightmare comes true, and the troops are divided, and it's going to be very difficult for the Germans to fight, but because they have strong allies, because they're incredibly well trained, because the Russians do not have excellent supplies, and these armies end up using trench warfare, ultimately, the Germans will be victorious for quite some time, until at least the United States gets involved in the war in 1917. Now, let's look at this last part as far as Germany's battle plan. So the Germans could have came in, and they could have come around right over here to Paris and tried to occupy it, because Paris is the capital city, and that's where you want to go. So that's what they could have done. However, that's not what they do. They want the element of surprise. Many of the Frenchmen are already lined up here at the border between France and Germany, and so they don't want to have this initial skirmish. As I said, come in, take out the military command center, boom, be done. So they go in through Belgium, which is kind of sneaky, kind of shady. Belgium is a neutral country. Think about delicious Belgian waffles and Belgian chocolates, and they're the first in the world to make French fries. They were neutral. They don't have a standing army. They're not involved in this. As the Germans come through, and they're going to be marching through the Ardennes forest, which no one expected, and then going to Paris, they commit terrible atrocities. And this is where people really start to demonize the Germans and call them the Huns, because they rape women, and they destroy cities, and they, eat all the livestock. They burn down homes. They steal people's treasures. And this is on a group of people who are neutral, which shows us that the war has changed. It is clearly a total war. It's not this just soldiers lining up on a battlefield who are going to be getting annihilated here. The average person could be impacted by this conflict, whether they intend to be and declare themselves to be aligned with someone or even neutral. Britain is going to be so outraged over what happened, plus they were part of the Triple Entente, that they decide to declare war on Germany. And so yet again, pretty much those alliances have been fulfilled, and the conflict has widened even further. Now, we didn't really get into talking about the first battles in trench warfare, so that'll be picking that up with Wednesday's lecture. So those video clips that I posted, you can hold off on watching those if you want. I'll be posting those again on Wednesday, and we'll be moving on from there. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a great day, guys, and I hope to see you all on Tuesday's Google Meet at 2:30. Later.